This happened to me and my family a few years ago. Even today, this story gives me chills and makes me think twice before opening the door to a stranger. I will tell everything as it happened, without exaggerations, because reality is scary enough. It all started on a stormy night. I was 14 years old at the time and lived with my parents and my younger sister, Diana, in a house far from the city center. Our house was on a quiet street, surrounded by similar houses. It was a place where everyone knew and trusted each other. That feeling of safety was shattered that night. We were all in the living room, watching TV and listening to the rain outside. The wind was blowing hard, and the thunder made the windows shake. Diana was sitting on the floor, playing with our dogs, Rex and Luna. My parents were on the couch, and I was in my favorite spot, an armchair near the fireplace. Suddenly, we heard a loud noise, as if someone was banging on the door forcefully. My dad got up, a bit irritated, thinking it was one of our neighbors needing help because of the storm. When he approached the door, he heard a voice on the other side, shouting for help. "Please help me, I'm hungry and cold." The voice sounded desperate, but something about it didn't seem right. My dad hesitated. He had always been a helpful guy, but something about that voice made him stop and think. Before he could open the door, the phone rang. It was our neighbor, Mr. Walter. My dad answered, and Mr. Walter started speaking hurriedly. "John, don't open the door," he said, almost out of breath. "There's a man outside. I saw him from my yard. He's holding something that looks like a hammer." My dad looked at me and my mom, his eyes full of concern. He gestured for everyone to be quiet and hung up the phone. The man's voice outside became more insistent. "Please, I'm starving. I just need some food," he shouted, now banging on the door harder. My dad decided to act quickly. He went to the kitchen and grabbed a knife, returning to the living room with a determined expression. My mom, Diana, and I huddled near the fireplace, trying to make as little noise as possible. The man outside kept banging and shouting, increasingly desperate. My dad approached the window next to the door and tried to see what was happening. He pulled the curtain just enough to peek through. That's when he saw the man clearly. He was tall and thin, with a scruffy beard and wide eyes. He was holding a hammer, swinging it back and forth while continuing to pound on the door with his other hand. My dad quickly closed the curtain and signaled us to go upstairs to our rooms. We climbed the stairs silently, our hearts pounding fast. Diana was crying, and I was trying to calm her down while my mom closed the bedroom door. My dad stayed downstairs, trying to keep the situation under control. From upstairs, we could hear the man outside getting more frustrated. He started hitting the door with the hammer, trying to break it down. My dad called the police, explaining the situation and urgently requesting help. The wait seemed endless, and with every bang on the door, my fear grew. Suddenly, we heard a loud noise coming from the porch. I ran to my bedroom window and looked outside. I saw Mr. Walter and his son, Michael, running towards the man with pieces of wood in their hands. They started shouting, trying to scare the stranger away. "Get out of here," Mr. Walter yelled. "The police are on their way." The man looked at them, confused and angry. For a moment, I thought he was going to attack them with the hammer, but then he grunted and ran across the street, disappearing into the night. A few minutes later, the police arrived. The officers talked to my dad and our neighbors, gathering as much information as possible. We were instructed not to leave the house and to lock all doors and windows. The police searched the area, but didn't find the man. That night was hell. We all stayed in the living room, trying to process what had happened. We thanked Mr. Walter and Michael for coming to help us. Without them, I don't know what could have happened. In the following days, the story spread throughout the town. We found out that the man was a fugitive, wanted for several crimes in the region, including robbery and assault. He had been on the run for weeks, and no one knew exactly where he might be. It was a hot July day, and at the time, I was only 13 years old. We lived in a small town in Michigan called Traverse City. My mother is a talented artist, and back then, she always worked in the studio we had built in our backyard. It was a magical place, full of paints, brushes, and unfinished canvases. It was in that place where my mother emptied the ideas from her mind into beautiful images. That week, we had received some relatives we hadn't seen in a long time. My uncles came along with their wives and children. It was a very happy day for me, as I was about to spend the day with my cousins, Ethan and Lily. We always loved playing when they visited us during the summer holidays. As usual, we decided to play hide and seek. The house was full, with my uncles and aunts chatting in the living room while we had fun outside. The rule was simple. We could hide anywhere in the backyard, including my mom's studio. But we could never run inside the house. We didn't want to bother the grown-ups. We played rock, paper, scissors to see who would be the seeker. Ethan ended up being the one. So Ethan was counting to 50, leaning against the giant tree in the middle of our backyard. Lily and I ran in opposite directions. I knew the studio would be a good hiding spot since it had many corners and objects to hide behind. Lily ran towards the car parked at the entrance of the backyard. I entered quietly and closed the door behind me. The studio was, as always, a bit messy, with canvases everywhere and dirty brushes left around. Sunlight was streaming through the large windows, illuminating the dust floating in the air. I could see that Mom had been very busy preparing to receive our guests and had forgotten to tidy up her workspace. I quickly crouched behind a pile of boxes near the back wall. I could hear Ethan's footsteps outside, searching for Lily first. He always did that. While I was there, crouched, trying to make as little noise as possible, it was at that moment that I heard a sound. Initially, I thought it was Ethan or Lily, but the sound was different. It was like light steps, almost inaudible, as if someone was trying not to be noticed. I began to feel that something was wrong. I looked through a crack between the boxes and saw a man. He was standing in the middle of the studio, looking around. He was someone I clearly didn't know. He looked dirty, and his clothes were worn out. He had his back to me, but I could see that he had messy hair and was barefoot. My heart started to beat faster. I had no idea who he was or how he had gotten in there. I stayed there, paralyzed, trying to decide what to do. My mind was a mess of thoughts and fear. He started moving, rummaging through my mom's things. He opened drawers, looked inside boxes, as if he was searching for something specific. I knew I needed to get out of there, to warn my mom or any adult, but I was afraid of being noticed. Slowly, I began to move back, crawling towards the door. I tried not to make any noise, but my foot hit an empty paint can. The sound was loud enough for the man to turn quickly. Our eyes met for a second. He had a vacant, almost insane look. Before he could react, I stood up and ran out of the studio. I ran as fast as I could to the house, screaming for my mom. She was in the kitchen, preparing something for lunch, and immediately ran to me when she saw my panicked state. I told her everything, almost out of breath, about the man in the studio. Then my uncles also came to know what was going on. I told them the same thing, that there was a strange man in my mom's studio. They said they would check. We stayed at the house's entrance, watching from a distance. My uncles entered the studio cautiously, but when they returned, their expressions were confused. They said there was no one there. The man had disappeared, as if he had never been there. Ethan and Lily came running, asking what was happening. I told them, but it seemed that no one really believed me. The adults searched around the house and in the backyard, but found no one. My dad called the police, who came and searched, but they also found nothing. They said it might have been a homeless person or someone just looking for a place to hide, but they found no signs of a break-in. The following days were strange. My mom started locking the studio, and I avoided going there alone. The adults tried to reassure me, saying I was safe. One night, a few weeks later, I woke up to a sound coming from the backyard. I got up and looked out the window of my room, which overlooked the studio. I saw a shadow moving inside. I grabbed my phone and called my dad, who was in the next room. He got up and ran to the backyard with a flashlight, but again, he found nothing. It was as if the man had vanished into thin air. My mom began to think I was imagining things, that maybe fear and anxiety were affecting me. But I knew what I had seen. That man was real, and he was still out there somewhere. A few months passed, and things began to return to normal. Ethan and Lily came to visit us again, but we avoided playing in the studio. We were all in the living room playing a board game when I heard a sound coming from the backyard. This time, it was a clear sound of footsteps on the porch. My dad got up slowly, grabbing a baseball bat he kept near the door. He opened the door and went outside, telling us to stay inside. We all stayed silent, listening to his footsteps outside. After a few minutes, he returned, but his expression was serious. He said he found footprints on the porch, but no one was around. That night, we all slept in the living room together. My parents were trying to protect us, but we knew something strange was going on. But there was nothing we could do except wait and be vigilant. The next day, my mom decided to sell the studio. She said it wasn't worth the stress and worry. We packed everything up, put it up for sale, and in a few weeks, a new buyer appeared. When we finally said goodbye to the studio, I felt relieved. But the fear, that feeling of being watched, never completely disappeared. This was an experience that left me shaken, and even today, I still remember it as if it were yesterday. If you like the story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. See you in the next video.